Good evening, I'm Francesca Martelli, a PhD student from Northumbria University, and this evening I will talk to you about my PhD research focusing on the interaction between pollinators and people in urban environments, with a particular focus on urban residential gardens and allotment gardens. Being in my first year of PhD, this evening I will discuss with you the aim of my research, and then I will share with you some preliminary data and findings from my first year of PhD, during which I carried out a preliminary study in a few allotment gardens in Newcastle upon Tyne. Before talking to you about my PhD, I will briefly give you an introduction on urban pollinators. Pollination by insects play a very important role in plant spread and reproduction. In Europe, its annual value is estimated to be 153 billion euros, with 84% of crop species and 78% of wildflower depending at least in part on insect pollination. Pollinated insects are declining, and one of the main causes is represented by habitat loss, also due to the increasing urbanization. Currently, over 50% of the world population lives in cities, with a projected rising trend in the following years, as you can see from this map, representing the expected urban population growth in millions until 2050. This map also showed the number of pollinator studies in urban landscape per country. As you can see, most studies were conducted in temperate and developed countries, while tropical and developing study location were less common. This can indicate a first research gap on urban pollinator studies. Pollinator responses to urbanization are in general highly mixed. Wenzel and colleagues carried out a literature review on urban pollinators, and they found out that the cause of these contrasting responses relied on two key attributes of the underlying study system: the state of naturalness of the non-urban control habitat and the progression of urban densification opposed to urban sprawl. A positive biodiversity outcome were repeatedly connected to moderate or intermediate levels of urbanization associated to urban sprawl. Higher levels of urbanization and disturbance as a result of progressing urban densification led to negative responses in pollinators diversity. However, inside the city, there can be some urban green areas that can potentially help urban pollinator communities to live inside the urban area. As a matter of fact, urban residential and allotment gardens, occupying about the 30% of urban areas in the UK, can potentially provide resources for pollinating insects communities, promoting both their diversity and abundance. Indeed, both allotment gardens and residential gardens contain higher flower abundance and richness compared to farmland and nature reserves, and also to other urban green spaces. Acting as pollinator hotspots and providing nectar sources throughout the year. This recent study from Tew and colleagues demonstrate that. So they calculate the nectar sugar production and the nectar diversity insect in 9 different urban green areas. And as you can see from the graph, garden and allotments demonstrate to have higher values for both. The horticultural flora, as well as garden management practices, is influenced by human preferences and accessibility to resources and to plants, and can strongly influence pollinator abundance and diversity, which is consequently influenced by a range of socioeconomic factors. Socioeconomic drivers can be described using the CES, the socioeconomic status, a complex measurement related to income, education, occupation, ethnicity, and access to resources. Variation in socioeconomic status can be linked to episodes of environmental injustice or the unequal distribution of natural resources benefit across the city among socioeconomic groups. And one emerging hypothesis is the luxury effect, which posits that neighborhoods with higher socioeconomic status have higher biodiversity than neighborhoods with a lower socioeconomic status. However, because of the complexity of human drivers, the relationship between socioeconomic status and biodiversity have been investigated only in a limited number of city and taxonomic groups, and the mechanisms are still little known. Moreover, Socioeconomic factors may also influence people's perception of pollinator diversity, and it is feasible that this variation might affect human well-being. Indeed, emerging evidence suggests that green space and biodiverse natural environments promote better mental health, and that a positive association between citizen assessment of species richness and self-reported well-being could exist. In urban ecosystems where human presence is so deep-rooted, ecological and socioeconomic variables influence each other, the former providing ecosystem services and health benefits, and the latter influencing ecological condition through management choice. My PhD project aimed to work at this interface, so considering both socioeconomic drivers and ecological drivers that can affect pollinator communities in urban residential gardens and allotments. Concerning socioeconomic drivers, I will consider different socio-demographic information of the garden or allotment owners, like age, family members, background, or job, characteristic of the house and the gardens, and garden management practices. I will also focus on perception that people have of biodiversity in their garden or allotment, and if there could be a connection with their self-reported well-being. About ecological drivers, I will obviously consider pollinators abundance and richness together with flower abundance and richness in each site, and I will also try to estimate the larval habitat availability in each garden. So more in detail, my PhD project would like to answer to specific question about concerning three different research areas. First of all, I would like to understand if the luxury effect holds for pollinators in residential gardens and allotments. Secondly, I would like to investigate the garden management practices and how they affect the provision of flora sources and larval habitat for pollinating insects in urban gardens and allotments, and how they can be improved to benefit urban pollinator communities. Lastly, if the perception of pollinators can change between along a socioeconomic status gradient and or between garden and allotments, and if there can exist a relationship between this perception and people's mental well-being. I will now briefly show you the activities I carried out during the first year of my PhD. I carried out a pilot study in Newcastle upon Tyne, focusing only on urban allotments that I mapped for a total of 69 allotment gardens, and then chosen with a stratified random sampling along a deprivation gradient using the most recent UK index of deprivation, and that you can see represented in this map with different colors, with a color gradient for that range from blue, more deprived, to yellow, less deprived. I selected 4 allotment gardens, namely Tweed Street, Schoolhouse, Iris Brickfield, and Littlemore North, that belong to different deprivation categories, for always along this gradient. I carried out some preliminary ecological sampling in each site, testing different methods. For pollinator and flower abundance and richness, I carried out in each allotment site one 100-meter linear center transect to have a more general overview of the allotment gardens. Along each transect, I sampled every 4 meters all the flowering plants, and along the whole transect, I record all the plant-pollinator interaction. I applied the same method, carrying out some short transect in a small number of study plots in each allotment garden. I also try to try different methods to estimate the presence of larval habitat inside each study plots, considering both the abundance of butterfly food plants and also the proportion of available potential nesting sites, nesting habitats for both cavity nesting and ground nesting bees. Concerning socioeconomic factors, I unfortunately, because of COVID restriction, couldn't carry out in-person social survey last year, but I've been able to prepare and spread an online questionnaire among the plot holders from Schoolhouse and Littlemore North allotments. So the questionnaire contains different categories of questions, ranging from social demographic and economics one to management practices, so asking typology and frequencies of management practice in the plot to each allotment plot holders, and also a small section about the perception of these people of biodiversity in their plot. This aspect, together with a possible connection with self-reported well-being, will be more thorough, hopefully through focus groups in March. I will now share with you some of the results I've obtained during my first year of research. I underline the fact that these are preliminary results, so they will require further analysis I will carry out during the next months. I will start giving you a broad overview of my ecological sampling data and results, specifically about the insect abundance I collected and identified in the allotment gardens. I recorded a total of 821 plant-pollinator interaction with 444 insects, specimen that I pinned and that will be sent to taxonomists for a more specific species identification. I report here some very broad graph, bar charts, in which I show the abundance of insect sample divided by categories and showing differences between the 4 allotment sites, always shown in different colors along the deprivation gradient, so ranging from blue, more deprived, to yellow, less deprived. In the first graph, on the left, we can see that bumblebees, honeybees, and flies were more commonly seen visiting flowers, with smaller numbers of visits from Lepidoptera, Coleoptera, solitary bees, wasps, and Hemiptera. Differences in honeybee abundance appear to be driven by the presence of beehives in 2 sites, Schoolhouse and Little More North. This will potentially alter plant pollinator networks at these sites and can indicate also an interesting potential social factor that can influence public perception of pollinating insects. From the second graph on the right, that is a very general graph, just considering the 4 allotment site and the pollinator abundance recorded in each, we can see that there is a slight trend for an increase in total pollinator abundance along the deprivation gradient, which supports the idea of the luxury effect. Obviously, further statistical analyses are needed, and we'll explore this relationship in more detail and incorporate data on floral abundance and social drivers. About the social survey, my questionnaire received 42 responses from 2 allotment gardens with a percentage of respondents of 28%. And I haven't analyzed the data yet, but I just show you some question and answer from the allotment plot holders that I found particularly representative. For example, about social demographic information. Most of the people in the allotment gardens are retired, more than 75 years old, and hold their allotments for long period of time. So most of the people have held the allotments for more than 10 years, and a very small amount of people for less than 1 year. About the public perception of biodiversity, I found particularly interesting that there is a clear overestimation of insect biodiversity, so of typology that bees or butterflies that people seem to see in their plot during the spring and summer season, while for other typology of animal like birds, people are more aware of the biodiversity present in the garden. Here I show you a representation of a comparison between 2 different allotments, using a question about the feature present in each allotment plot. For example, we can see that there are some clear difference concerning some specific feature, for example, the presence of pond or hedges or trees that can potentially alter plant pollinator communities or influence their abundance or diversity. So I will surely consider this aspect and carry out some correlation analysis to see if exists a correlation between the presence or absence of this feature and pollinator diversity and abundance, and if these correlations are significant or not. The contribution to knowledge that my project would bring would be multiple. First, the identification of social mechanisms driving urban pollinator diversity as the luxury effect would help to design targeted initiatives to mitigate eventual episodes of environmental injustice. Secondly, the identification of the best gardening strategies would help to create a scientific-based list of good practices that can promote pollinator-friendly citizens' behavior. The exploration of the availability of larval habitat is being rarely taken into account as a research topic in urban pollinator studies, and so this would surely fill a research gap. And lastly, this would be the first research of public perception and attitudes towards urban wildlife involving pollinators, a specific approach, species-specific approach on pollinator, and a possible positive impact of pollinator diversity on human well-being would potentially provide further justification for people to have pollinator-friendly behavior, and so to encourage them to protect biodiversity also within their private urban green areas. I would like to really thank you for listening and for your attention. A special thanks to my supervisor, Catherine Baldock, Mark Goddard, and Alistair Scott. And I would like also to thank Urban Green Newcastle for the support and the allotment secretaries that gave me the access to the 4 allotment site in which I sampled, Tweed Street, Schoolhouse, Iris Brickpit, and Little Moor North. And also thanks to all the plot holders that gave me permission to sample inside their plots and give me permission to carry out my questionnaire and social survey. I invite you to ask any question or doubts or even to make suggestion if you have some, contacting me through email or on Twitter. Thank you very much for listening.